Hey Gloomers, welcome back to Nerdhaven. Today we're going to be talking about the Brutes solo scenario. So there will be spoilers for that scenario, as well as spoilers for items from Prosperity level 3 and from the Scenario 67 item reward. With that, let's return to the Black Barrow. Alright, so I just did the Brute solo scenario today, and I failed on my first attempt pretty badly. I made some changes to my deck, to my strategy and how I went about it. A little bit of RNG luck helped me out the second time around, and I really crushed it. So I wanted to make a little video just talking about what my experience was like, what cards I used when I did it successfully, some of the strategy that I employed, and how I was able to get through it. So let me talk a little bit about what my party comp has been like so far. When we started the campaign, I played Brute, and we had a Mine Thief, a Cragheart, and a Tinkerer with us. The Cragheart and the Tinkerer did a decent amount of job helping to keep me topped off in health, and the Cragheart did a little bit of work to help split some of the tanking duties. So I wasn't a full-on tank. I was able to sort of focus a bit more on damage than maybe a full tank build for Brute. Based off of that, I went into this solo scenario using the same cards that I play with in my traditional campaign, and that was a mistake. So the items I'm using are the Boots of Striding, the Warhammer, the Eagle-Eye Goggles, and Chainmail. And for consumables, I'm also using a minor stamina potion, a minor power potion, and a power core, which is the item reward from Scenario 67. So when I did this scenario the first time, I was level 5. And the cards that I normally bring with me are Balanced Measure, Brute Force, Fatal Advance with an enhancement of Jump on bottom, Leaping Cleave with an enhancement of +1 damage on top, Skewer, Skirmishing Maneuver, Spare Dagger, Trample, Unstoppable Charge, and Warding Strength. So using the cards I brought in with me, I didn't have enough as far as damage mitigation or health recovery, and I ended up taking a lot more hits than I really should have taken, and it made it hard for me to really get through the scenario because I was having to discard cards to avoid damage far too often. I also, from a strategy standpoint, learned I didn't do enough to prioritize getting through the elites and getting through the first rooms. It took everything in me just to get through the first 2 rooms, and by the time I got to the final room, I mean, my last turn was basically entering the room, and then I exhausted out. One of the benefits that I got from going through it the first time was I got just enough experience to level. So I actually hit level 6, which meant my second attempt, I was able to go in with some extra hit points. I actually forgot to take my perk, so I didn't actually get the benefit of an extra perk. But I also got to take my level 6 card, which I ended up taking Immovable Phalanx. So I brought Immovable Phalanx and Eye for an Eye in with me, and those replaced Balanced Measure and Skewer. Now let me talk about why I made these changes. I wanted to bring Eye for an Eye in because I like the idea of Retaliate. If I was going to be sitting there taking damage, then I wanted to be able to deal damage back as a result of it. The Elite Bandit Guard also had a shield, so if he was going to be hitting me, it would bypass that shield, do some extra damage to him. And the bottom of it I really liked because it was a way for me to get my health back. Other than long rests, I didn't have anything else to get health back. So when I was going to take some hits, if I'm standing in place doing attacks and not moving, at least this would give me the option to get some health back in the meantime. My level 6 card's great, Immovable Phalanx, because it allows me to go very early, do a pretty big attack, and also get a shield out of it. I don't generally love shields in the campaign mode because my goal isn't to take a lot of damage, it's to mitigate damage. But in this scenario, it's pretty hard to avoid it. So I find shield to be a lot more useful here. I also don't love how on many of the shield cards, you don't really feel all that confident that shield is going to be in place before an attack comes in. And it's really frustrating to play a shield card anticipating, hey, I'm going to mitigate some damage, and then the enemies go before you, and it's sort of like a wasted turn, and you end up taking a bunch of extra damage anyway. So I've tended to shy away from shield probably than some other brutes. But a movable phalanx is great because it's a big attack and the shield is a nice bonus to it. And it's all at 17 initiative, so you feel pretty good that you're going to get that off ahead of time. In this scenario, sometimes the bandits can go at initiative 15. So, it is a little bit of a risk, but, it's one that's probably worth taking here. Skewer is a pretty easy one to get rid of. The bottom is a move 6, but it's a lost card, so I try not to use it too often for that. The top's okay. It's an attack 3, and you can hit 2 targets, but I find that it's a bit harder to line up than some of the other AoEs that Brute has, particularly because, often you're in the front lines, you're going to have multiple targets in melee range of you. With Skewer, you actually need one that is outside of melee range in order to hit both targets. And the only card I have that creates air is Leaping Cleave, and I don't use the bottom of that card very often. I use the top a lot because I have an enhancement to it, so it does a lot of damage for me. For Balanced Measure, that card generally pairs very well with Trample. And in many scenarios, Trample allows me to pop a whole bunch of my items and do a ton of damage and a ton of crowd control in one room. And usually I save it for the last room of a scenario, and it allows us to do a lot of work in that room and get through that room pretty quickly when we're wrapping up the scenario. So the way it works is you can pop your boots to get an extra 2 move comboed with Trample, and you end up, everything that you jump through, you do an attack 2 against. But I'll pop my Eagle Eye Goggles and my Power Potion, so it's actually basically an attack 3 with advantage on everything that I run through. And the boots allows me to go through more enemies. So, I can hit 5 enemies, no problem. And then I'll also pop my Warhammer, which means they're all stunned. So I can do a ton of damage and stun them, and it's pretty easy for the most part to clean up after the fact. Now, usually I'll combo Trample with Balanced Measure because after doing this really long move, I'll then have a massive attack that I can use on a boss or an elite that's in that room to do some heavy damage on it. But in this scenario, there's no elite in the last room. It's just a bunch of small creatures. So, it's a lost card, Trample, and I try not to use it too early unless I really need to. But the Balanced Measure piece didn't really work here. So I swapped out my cards, I leveled up, and I was ready to give my scenario another shot. Now, on top of the cards that I brought in with me, I also employed a bit of a different strategy. So knowing that I really needed to focus on that first room and clearing it out quickly, I spent way too much time in there the first time around. That was going to be a big focus for me this time. I had also been wanting to save my Power Core, and that summon, I think, is a card that I would have taken better advantage of by playing early, and so that's what I did this time around. So I actually lucked out, I think, a bit in the first attack, because on turn 1, their ability was to just shield up and poison on an attack. And they went before me, so they just stood in place and did nothing. They didn't get to poison me, and it did make me have to move to them, but it was sort of a wasted turn for them, so that was welcome to me. I moved up right in front of the elite, and I also dropped my summon right next to me, and did some big attacks. I was able to kill the elite pretty quickly. Once the elite was down, and it was down to just 2 non-elites, I moved forward by opening the door and then taking a step right back to where I was, which opened up the second room. And there are a few reasons I wanted to do this. One, I wanted to bottleneck the bandits coming in so that I could condense them and not get attacked by all of them at once. I also had my summon here, so I wanted them to slowly feed in while the summon was alive and really have full advantage of the summon for clearing 2 rooms instead of just 1 while it tried to catch up. Having the bottleneck in the doorway, there's a lot of value as the brute for being able to do different AoE attacks, like the Leap and Cleave. And so having, multiple targets in the doorway there, that allowed me to take advantage of that card a couple of times and maximize the damage. And the last piece is the Elite Archer in the back of the room. I was really foolish the first time through. I just went through and brute forced it. I had Warding Strength up to help mitigate damage, and so I didn't have any other push cards in my deck. And my plan was to just kill the archer and jump over the traps. Pretty dumb idea. I really should have taken advantage of pushing the archer through the traps. And by hanging back with the door open, I forced the archer to come forward, and that caused him to be in a position where I would ultimately be able to push him into traps. For the most part, this strategy worked flawlessly. I was able to clear through all of those enemies very easily, very quickly. the archer moved up into the perfect position where I was actually able to push him through both traps. So I did an attack 3, hit him with the first trap, which did 5 damage, and then the second trap, which finished him off. So the last thing to do was to go in and clear out the final room. I was in good shape. I think I had probably 8 to 10 hit points. A good chunk of my cards left. I was in great shape, and I knew, unless I really botched this, that I'd be able to do this no problem. So the first thing I did was I walked into the doorway and moved right up to the skeletons, and I dropped my immovable phalanx. The thing I mentioned before about shield, where you're not confident if you're going to be able to actually get it out before the enemies go. Well, the nice thing about going through a doorway is you can guarantee your shield's going to be up before anything in that doorway attacks you, even if its initiative is lower than yours. So that worked out great. I was able to go in, I did a big attack. My shield 1 mitigated 4 damage, from each of the targets that attacked me. And I was right up in their face to be able to get my combo off on the second turn. So again, I used my trample combo. I ran through everything with my boots. I stunned everything with the advantage and the +1 from my consumable items. Did a ton of damage. And I ended up playing the top of skirmishing maneuver with it. And that allowed me to actually finish off both of the archers in that turn. So all I had left was 2 skeletons that were stunned. I was able to make quick work of the skeletons, and that was it. I beat the scenario. And to be honest, it was pretty easy. I think I ended the scenario with 8 hit points, and I had enough cards, assuming I didn't have to discard anything, to go another 5 rounds. So it really wasn't too hard at all. So that's the strategy I used, and it worked really well. And if you're trying to do the brute solo scenario, I think this is a good strategy. Now, you may not have the same items as me, and you may not have taken the same cards that I took each time I leveled up, but I think you probably have at least some of these same things, and you could probably use a pretty similar strategy if you're trying to go through this yourself as your brute. Now, obviously, this isn't going to work for everybody. It's going to depend on what you have for items. It's also going to depend on which cards you've taken as you've leveled up. I think pushing the elite archer into at least one of the traps is probably a must. That extra 5 to 10 damage, if you can get them through both traps, is a huge benefit. It also prevents you from having to use jump to get over the trap yourself, so it gives you some flexibility on how you get into that final room. So now that the scenario is complete, I was fortunate enough to have an imposing blade, which was about as useful as 25 gold. This is not a good card. I wouldn't recommend using it unless you have a pretty unique build. You've heard what I've mentioned about shields. The brute does not have great initiative. So in order to kill an enemy early enough that additional enemies still need to go and are going to be focusing you, to even get the benefit of the shield is going to be hit or miss. Like the stars really need to align for this card to start to pay off for you, and I just don't see it. So I'm going to take my 25 gold and I'm going to keep my Warhammer build. But it was fun to go through. It gave me some insights to thinking about this character in a different way. And honestly, I'm probably going to have to play him differently now that our Cragheart has retired. This was a good way for me to re-explore how to play the brute and probably play him better with the new class makeup that we're going to have in our scenario. So even if you've looked at the item ahead of time and you've said, this item isn't very good, it's not worth me doing, I had a lot of fun doing it. I learned more about the brute, and I think it's going to make me a better player going forward. If you've already done this scenario, what did you do differently? Leave a comment below and let me know. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this, and subscribe if you want to be notified when I post new videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.